What's going on, guys? Welcome into another call with another great commercial real estate mind. And that is none other than my buddy, Mr. Cecil Cummins. And I met Cecil early in my kind of mastermind journey. This was when GoBundance was first starting, and he was interning for one of the founders of GoBundance. Then he was basically working for free for GoBundance at all of the events, and he was coordinating and facilitating everything. And I just knew right away, you see somebody and you're like, man, this dude's a killer. He's going to be successful one day. And I don't know, you were what, like 18, 19 at that time?
I first connected with GoBundance actually when I was in college, and it must have been April maybe of 2015 because we hosted an event with Gary Vaynerchuk and David Osborne as the keynote speakers, and we rented
Right.
out the Xfinity Center at University of Maryland.
Yep. So Cecil has been somebody that is just a connector, always looking to add value to people. And anytime he puts his time and energy into something, he does it with 110% and then some. And I think you guys will see and hear his passion for commercial real estate and what he does. And obviously learning a little bit more about your journey of, kind of going from what is commercial real estate to now being this, kind of big hotshot broker on the East Coast, and working with different groups and funds and, investors. And we're really, what I was excited about is, Cecil is somebody that has touched a lot of different real estate asset classes. He's worked with a lot of different, mom and pop investors all the way up to private equity groups, and found a way to do it, in a what makes it seem like a pretty easy way. And so, just hearing and learning more about your perspective, your journey, how to work with brokers, obviously acquisitions and dispositions. You've kind of been, worked your way through all those different parts of the kind of commercial real estate journey. So why don't, and guys, this is going to be more of just like an interactive, fun fireside chat. There is no specific, hey, I'm going to ask these questions. We're going to kind of go and navigate where you guys see, some curiosity and where you want to ask questions. We have a lot of topics that Cecil and I have talked about and that we can definitely lean in on. But we're going to lean on you guys to kind of guide where the conversation goes. But I figure just to give, people a little bit more background and history on you, Cecil, and kind of where you got started, where you're at today, maybe give us just a quick little brief, history on your journey into commercial real estate and where we find you at today.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Maddie. I really appreciate the opportunity here. Very excited to talk with you all. I will give a quick intro. I essentially got introduced to the world of real estate when I guess I was selling Cutco knives in high school, went off to college, and one of my clients, convinced me to leave Cutco to go actually try to start a drone company focused on precision agriculture. And this is not related at all in the sense, but it gives you an idea of kind of direction. I looked to drop out of college, went to go start this company with these guys where I was just going to be their workhorse. And then their whole contract on purchasing these drones fell apart. And so I went back to school and I said, all right, I'm going to study here, do as much as I can. I went to a small liberal arts school in Maryland, had an opportunity to double up on a bunch of credits and did a triple major in accounting, economics, and business administration. Finished in 3.5 years there just because I'm a workhorse and school is not my forte, but I do love learning, ironically. So got out of college, and my first job out of school was the personal assistant to Mike McCarthy. Had established a relationship for a couple of years with GoBundance, and it was actually I traveled for about a month in across the southern coast of Africa in January of like 2017, and then flew from Mozambique to Whistler, British Columbia for a GoBundance event. A whole bunch of stuff happened at that event, and afterwards I said, I need to go follow the person that is doing the things that I want to be doing, in a couple of decades. And that was Mike McCarthy. And so I went and I worked with him full time as his personal assistant for about 6 months. And we realized that I'm an entrepreneur, and as much as I'm a hustler, I'm not good when I cannot. Excuse me. My strengths are in making independent decisions and moving quickly. When you're somebody's personal assistant, you need to do what they want, not necessarily what you think is right. So Mike and I actually had a mutual like, hey, maybe I should go be an entrepreneur. I have a great relationship with Mike to this day. But I came back to Annapolis, my hometown. Mike actually even helped me out, kept me on salary for a little bit so I could purchase a home, leverage that income. And then I kind of went door to door looking for work and met a consultant who had just won a massive award, like as in a bid. He wanted a bid for a consulting project for the city of Princeton, New Jersey. It was a 300-acre development with about 300,000 square feet of retail, about 250,000 square feet of office, a hotel with about 125 keys, and then 1,000 residential units. And this guy had actually just broken off of his firm and was a one-man shop. And it was essentially like, I need somebody to do all of the legwork for me. So I went and I did a feasibility study, a fiscal impact study, a density impact study, or just a density study in general, and then kind of had no idea what I was doing. But he gave me all these questions that needed to be answered, gathered all this data and presented it to him. And he formulated it into a kind of a narrative to share with the city of Princeton, New Jersey. And he was guiding the city, the municipality on how they should work with the developer who had won the project, essentially. And in that moment, I kind of knew, I was like, wow, this is what I want to do. So that was kind of my first leg into the development world. I'd cut my teeth actually buying Baltimore City row homes while I was in college because I got my real estate license a couple of years prior, getting involved with a couple of just kick-ass guys, Brenton Hess, Austin Carroll, and a few other really noteworthy people. I could name a lot of them, but for the sake of time, I won't. And so that was kind of my introduction to real estate, cutting my teeth on buying row homes. But this is my real introduction to commercial real estate, was where I wanted to be. And again, I don't want to go too much into detail here, but at the same time, I was volunteering on a local political campaign, which is a great way to get involved at a higher level locally if you're investing locally. But that can be another conversation. And a lot of the people that were donors were involved in real estate. And I said, I want to get into development, got connected with a local firm with great roots, and started working there in 2017. And then over the last 7 years, I've grown to broker about $195 million in transactions across 130 deals. And I grew to be the number one broker in the company of 20 brokers, and up against the guys who've been in the business for 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, in my 5th year in business. Last year I was number 2. This year we'll see. It's neck and neck. I would rather lose a tight race than win by a large margin. But it's a great friendly competitive atmosphere, and it's a very interesting time in commercial real estate in terms of the macroeconomic variables in play, and just many other things that we can discuss. So over the last 7 years, when I started out, it's obviously a commission only role. I pretty much did everything that I could do to earn a dollar, anything from small office executive suite leasing, retail leasing, all the way up to any sale transaction, buy representation that I could. And as I developed myself, now I'm predominantly focused on investment sales and owner-occupied acquisitions in a very niche part of Maryland. So suburban corridor between Baltimore and DC, kind of stretching out to Frederick, sort of that western part of Maryland, but not Western Maryland, over kind of to the Bay Bridge, which is the bridge to the Eastern Shore, the peninsula part of Maryland. And I'll take a few projects outside of that, but that's pretty much where we're focused. And actually, real quick, do this. I can share my screen if you'd like, just to give a quick little scope.
I made you a co-host, so you should be able to share now.
Perfect. Okay, can you see this? I think a case study now, right? Okay. So this is actually something that we could talk about later too, in terms of best practices working with brokers. I'll dive into it later, but everybody should have a 1-pager or a 2-pager or something. And so this kind of gives you an idea of what I'm focused on. Office, 20,000 to 120,000 square feet, retail 20 to 120, multifamily 50 to 300 units. And then we do have a lot of other single story flex and industrial opportunities in the 40 to 150,000 square foot range. This is actually a little bit outdated, but I've closed a couple more since then, just to give you an idea of the square footage of building brokered, things of the sort. And then my second page here is kind of an example of some of our success stories. So, office building, retail office. This is a retail ground lease. office building. This was a huge development with 500 units and 100,000 square feet of commercial. This is a 10,000 square foot retail center, 20,000 square foot flex building, 33 unit single family home portfolio, medical office building. And this is a government office building, just as a quick example there. Here's another one that's a little bit more geographically focused on some of the transactions here. But I'll stop sharing screen now. Let me see here. Oh, you know what? Actually, I'll do one more share just to give you another quick scope before I finish my introduction here. This is my website, and this is another thing that I always recommend that any active investor have is some type of landing page to show who you are, what you've done, what you've accomplished, what you're focused on. And again, I'll go into more detail on why that's important, but I've got some testimonials, quick about me, and then I have our full listings where you can look in the entire through our entire company of options that we have, some highlighted properties, some past transactions, and then I have blog and whatnot here. So that's just a quick kind of highlight to give you an idea of where we are. I have sold hospitality, I've sold multifamily, I've sold single family home portfolios, I have sold retail, I've sold office, I've sold government, I've sold medical, I've sold development projects. Let's see, I've sold some industrial. I've actually lost out on more industrial deals over the last 18 months than I've ever even looked at because we just cannot compete in some cases with the institutional cash funds that are literally just paying cap rates equivalent to the 10-year treasury. So I've got a lot of kind of expertise in different things, but what I have more of than anything else is lessons learned, either from my own missteps or from my clients' missteps. And I'd love to be able to dive into that as well. So let me just pause real quick. Hopefully that was a good kind of background on who I am.
Yeah, I
And
think
I'll
from
turn it
that
back over to you before I
perspective,
go into more.
we'll dig in on a lot more of the lessons learned. Um, Maybe you can talk a little bit more around what asset classes, being that you've touched a lot of different asset classes, which ones do you like and why? And, what are some of the, real foundational skill sets and building blocks that you had to learn in order to really be able to navigate the world of commercial real estate and successfully get deals across the finish line?
I think, well, there's a couple of different things. My favorite asset class personally is neighborhood retail across the board. But what I will look at for investment opportunities is very much dependent on the economic cycle and where I am geographically based. It's no secret that real estate is very geographically focused, and you could look in one pocket here, and it's completely different values, completely different trajectory than another pocket. Maryland is obviously very dense compared to some other states, and so but even then there's still very much pockets that are just completely different focus. In terms of asset classes, I think what's really important, if we take it back up to a bird's eye view for a second, is you as an investor are competing against a ton of other people, and so for you have to look at in commercial specifically, what are my specific skill sets that I'm going to bring to the table to be able to compete with somebody else and find value that either somebody else won't, or I can find value at a lesser cost. And when I say lesser cost, a lot of times you're competing against institutions with a ton of overhead. So if you're an individual investor and you can bring the same value as an institution, but you don't have the overhead, you can beat them on any offer any day, unless they're a cash fund buying at a ridiculously low rate. And so when you talk about what asset classes that you might want to focus on, like it is a great example. I had a client who is a lender, and he buys bad debt, and then he'll sell off these assets, if he forecloses on them, takes them, because they don't really like to hold real estate. And he traditionally is, just known for buying debt and then, selling off these oddball assets. But every time he's had these oddball assets, he doesn't have any real information on it. They haven't really added any value. He's buying them because he's buying them for cents on the dollar, taking incredible tax benefits and coming out with a good profit because it's a debt play, not because it's a real estate play. And for him, he just sells them off right away and makes sure he maximizes tax benefits and is still turning a profit on the disposition. But he knows that he's not an expert in managing or holding these assets. And he calls me actually literally like 3 months ago, and he says, "Hey," he goes, "I want to buy a hotel, Cecil." And I was like, "No, you don't." And I said it not because you don't want to buy hotels. I said it because this guy should not be buying a hotel. I said, that's not what you do. I said, I would love to show you the 6 hotels that you could buy, but that's just not you. I know who you are and know what your strengths are. And it's not going to be a successful play if we go after a hotel for you. And I said, why do you want to buy one? He goes, well, my daughter just got off of Wall Street. She's sick and tired of the work there. She wants to get into hospitality. She's so smart. And I just want to buy a hotel for her to run. I was like, okay, that makes sense. Let me connect your daughter with 3 hospitality guys locally that she can work for because you don't want to buy a hotel. So that's a little anecdote in the sense that, going back to the comment, what is your value that you're going to bring to the table, and how are you going to be able to, um, extract the most out of an investment that you can, that somebody else might not be able to, or you can do better than others. So that might be underwriting, that might be seeing something on the front end that others don't. It might be, some type of forensic accounting in the way that they do things, restructuring the leases. It could be better management. It could be more active leasing. It could be a total improvement because you own a construction company and you have economies of scale and you can reface an entire facade. It could be, a market better than you think the owner is. I mean, again, I don't need to rattle off ideas, but it's, what is your value? And then, what is your background? Do you know hospitality? Do you know office? Do you know medical? Do you know how the tenants in your investments operate? Do you know, what it's like, or do you at least have a glimpse or an ability to understand, where they're coming from, so that you can see and anticipate what the future might bring for your investment? Um, and again, I don't want to ramble too much. Is that helpful? Do you want me to go into more detail on that
No,
answer?
no,
Is that
yeah, no,
helpful?
that's good. And you mentioned earlier on you like neighborhood retail strip centers. Tell me more why neighborhood retail strip centers, and is that just because of your specific local market, or is this just as an asset class, across the board?
I think I love service-based tenants above retail, like sales specifically, but I'm not opposed to retail sales. Retail sales obviously are very influenced by the state of the economy, versus service-based stuff typically tends to be more stable. Your smaller retail centers, and again, neighborhood retail can be a wide range, in my opinion, right? I mean, I think that could be up to like, I mean, there could be a neighborhood retail center at 60,000 square feet. I think there's a difference of like, is it shadow anchor? Is it grocery anchored? Is it just small, small tenants? What's the average tenant size? You have credit tenants, non-credit tenants, are they mom and pop? So there's, again, so many different ways to classify. So my definition of neighborhood retail is really a small, non-grocery anchored, non-shadow anchor retail center that serves a community. And what I mean by that is, I look at the density of the residential locally, and I just think about, if I'm going home and I want to stop at a convenience store, or if I'm at home and I want to go, I don't know, or my wife, let's reference my wife. She wants to get her nails done. She wants to get a massage. She wants to get her hair done. Is she driving 30 minutes, or is she driving 5 minutes? Well, it depends on how loyal she is to her stylist or whatever. But oftentimes we're looking within proximity. And again, this is also somewhat true with grocery, but you're entering into a different echelon with grocery anchor. It's a lot more competition. You're competing with big dogs with straight cash that can spend $30 million and get a loan later. So you just have to know who you are in the realm of players and who you can compete against. And you don't want to be competing against people you can't compete against, or else you're going to be just running into a wall. You need to know what you're capable of.
At what
And so
at
anyway,
what at what point price point wise, do you see it kind of be, hey, here and below it's mom and pop, here and below it kind of gets into, a little bit more competitive space. Hey, here and above, you're just dealing with institutional capital. Like, what is kind of those tiers that people could be aware of when they're talking about understanding their competition based on the price point of the asset?
I would say most investment offices, like family office or investment firms, things like that, aren't touching anything under, $2.5 million typically. But I wouldn't say you're really getting up into the bigger like fish in the sea until north of 5 million. And honestly, even then, you're typically like the big dogs is usually they have a floor of about $15 million in terms of acquisition price. Um, that's not the only criteria. Obviously, there's so many variables that they'll look at. obviously, they could have a center that's $15 million because it's totally distressed and needs a complete reface, and it's actually a $30 million center. Or, I could change those numbers around with arbitrary inserts. But what I would say is what you need to understand is like how much capital do you have to play, how quickly can you act, and how much confidence can you instill in the seller's ability for you to perform. And if you're playing in an arena where you're up against bigger fish, you have to be able to prove that you're just as qualified, because what a seller cares about most is certainty to close. Even though price point is just like is arguably their most important factor in an offer, certainty to close is right in alignment with that. And if you have two offers side by side with the same price, and one person has closed on 7 of those centers this year and you haven't closed on one, doesn't matter how much you want it, and it doesn't matter that your terms are exactly the same, they're going with them 10 times out of 10. And so you need to make sure that the arena that you're in is arena that you can deliver certainty to close just like the other competitors. So if you're in an arena where you're just starting out, staying under 2.5 million is where you're going to find the most opportunity, and you could play up to $5 million. But in the 2.5 to $5 million range, you're going to have those smaller investment firms that are also tossing out offers left and right. Even though they're focused on bigger stuff, they'll still buy smaller stuff. 5 to 10 million is typically a hard range actually for buyers to be in, because a lot of times there's just a much smaller pool there because it's too small for institutional, too big for individual investors, and then the investment firms, the smaller investment firms are playing in that field. But you just have to know like how many of those there are. And again, I can go in a lot of detail, and I don't
Yeah.
want to
Well,
go too
maybe
much on that. Hopefully that answered the question.
no, that does. And maybe you can talk a little bit more about, I know you represent a lot of sellers. You also represent a lot of buyers. And so what a strong LOI and an offer looks like. You know how to present a strong LOI and an offer. Talk about maybe some of the mistakes you see people making when submitting LOIs, or maybe some of the things you make sure you always do to show that you're putting your best foot forward. And maybe just some of those levers that, people may want to think about pulling on when they're, trying to put their best foot forward in an offer situation.
Perfect. Absolutely. So certainty to close, coming back to that, is going to be established in your offer and what's included in that offer. And certainty to close is also based on your history, based on who you are and how much they can find out about you. If you're a total unknown, then they're not going to take you seriously at all unless you work with a broker that they know, or you bring the Taj Mahal of presentations in your offer. Also, communicate, and I'm going to go into detail specifically on these offers, but communication is also huge. Assuming it's a listing broker, representing the seller, how often are you talking to them on the phone? What are your conversations like with them? Are you building a rapport and a trust with that person so that when your offer does come through, they can tell the seller, hey, I've actually had a lot of conversations with these people. They've asked a lot of really good questions about this asset. They told me a little bit about X, Y, and Z. And so then there's a story, there's a narrative like, hey, this is something that's real. This is not just somebody that's just flipping offers left and right. In terms of what's in your offer, a seller is going to look at how comprehensive your offer is. And what they want to know is, when I get to a legally binding agreement and our attorneys are negotiating, are there going to be a ton of business terms that are going to pop up, or have we pretty much established the nuts and bolts of this, of this agreement? What I mean by that is you have your clear, defined typical business terms: purchase price, deposit, study period, closing period, any other potential contingency periods if you're going through entitlements, as terms of components of an offer. But how is title going to be delivered? Who is the title company? What happens if you need delays? What happens? Well, I mean, and what are you asking for in due diligence? Do you have a due diligence list prepared? Have you already dove into due diligence? Have you already asked a bunch of questions about an asset? Are you asking for estoppels? Are you asking for tenant interviews? And again, there's a lot of things that I can rattle off here, but the purpose of what I'm trying to get at with my answer is, when you present an offer, you want it to be a sophisticated, comprehensive offer so that when the seller receives it, they say, oh, this person has spent a lot of time understanding what my asset is. They already have done some preliminary diligence. They're not going to just throw in an offer to get this under contract and then begin their diligence. They've already done a lot of front loading work. So I don't need to stress about a bunch of uncertain reactions to information coming up down the road. And so when you present that offer, not only do you want to have as many terms that are relative to this specific asset clearly defined as possible, but you also want to express what you already understand about the asset. And a due diligence list, by the way, is not something typically I include in a letter of intent, but I include that comment in the sense that I'm typically having conversations with with the alternate party on the other side, like in great detail about what they know about the asset already. If I'm representing the seller, I'm telling the buyer broker, everything that's wrong about the property before they even present an offer. So that way later on they can't come back. If I'm representing a buyer, I'm trying to assess everything about it and let the seller broker that we're already aware of X, Y, and Z, and that's not going to be an obstacle down the road. And all of that comes back to certainty to close. A couple other quick points that I'll include in LOI: who you are and what you've accomplished is important. You can either include that as copy or as an exhibit on your LOI, or you can just reference, here's our website, here's our landing page, or something of the sort. But if you're a relative unknown, i.e., you're not a big company that everybody can reference easily, you're gonna need to establish credibility with who you are, and it doesn't just come with proof of funds. Although if you don't have established credibility in market, you need to have a proof of funds with every initial offer, no matter what. Even if the seller doesn't request it or require it until you come to terms, you want to right off the bat, hey, look, I've got money. Here's my money. Here's my lender. Here's my game plan. Here's my attorney. Here's my title company. Like, all of these things have already been established. It's not something that I'm going to establish once we come to an agreement. I'm not going to get under contract and say, all right, let me go call 5 bankers. No, it's, hey, I've got my lender, I've got my terms, I already have a preliminary term sheet. And every bank's different on how they deliver that. I've already got my title company, I've already got my attorney, I can run conflicts. Anyway, I'll pause right there. But the point again is, all of this comes back to certainty of close, which comes with credibility, which comes with a comprehensive offer where there's not going to be a bunch of potential business terms discussed in a legally binding agreement later that could be an obstacle. You're going to show that you can move quickly, efficiently, and without issue.
That's great. I
I'll
mean,
pause there.
I think that's such an important thing to highlight, is just how much preparation you do ahead of time to put your best foot forward, right? Some people are going to just try and put in as many LOIs as possible, and right, that's a strategy. But it sounds like from what you're saying, right, the good brokers, the good investors, they're really doing a lot of that upfront work to remove as much of the potential friction that most investors and brokers know could come down the road. And if you can eliminate a lot of that friction or address a lot of that ahead of the time, sometimes it sounds like that's the difference between what gets the deal done and the LOI accepted. And you
Well,
brought
and I'll even jump in. Like, there's nothing wrong with sending a ton of offers, but you don't want to just send them blindly. Oh, I know, like, here off the cuff, here's a cap rate, or off the cuff, here's a price per square foot, or here's my offer. Like, I want to actually show them that I know what I'm offering on and I've done the work. I could be sending 15 offers a week, if I have the bandwidth. So it's not necessarily like I don't have any problem with the quantity of offers. It's just making sure the offer itself is presented well. I just wanted to clarify
Yeah,
that
no, that's a
too.
great point. And maybe to the newer investors that are saying, well, maybe I don't have a landing page, or I don't have this experience yet. What are some of the suggestions you might have as a broker saying, hey, this might be this person's first commercial property, but with a lot of the stuff that you just kind of identified being maybe present there, are there any other things that you as a broker look at that kind of allow you to get more comfort with the investor, even knowing that they're newer? Or maybe to flip that question on the other side of the head, which is, what are some of the things that are absolute no-nos that immediately are a giveaway for, like, this person has no freaking clue what they're doing and it's going to be a headache working with them?
Sure. Well, this also goes back to compete in the arena that you can compete in right now. If you're making offers on something that has 15 offers and you haven't been able to establish, the credibility or track record, you're gonna have a really difficult time winning offers unless you are far and above the highest price point. And that's just a reality that's important to understand. But all of that said, um, obviously I'm biased because I believe working with brokers is important, but there's plenty of clients that are capable of going without brokers, and you definitely don't need one. But if you're going after your first acquisition, um, You either need to show that you know what you're doing and you're not going to have blunders along the way, or you need to have representation that knows what they're doing. Because the other side, again, comes back to certainty of close. So let's say I don't have a broker. Let's say this is my first acquisition, but I'm gung ho. I have, I've learned everything that I feel like I needed to learn for the asset that I'm pursuing. Then the steps that I'm going to take is I'm going to have in-depth conversations with that selling team. I'm going to let them know how much time I'm spending looking at this. I'm going to let them know how much I know about the asset. If you're doing long distance investing, it's not always easy to do site visits, but site visits are a really easy way to build quick rapport, show them who you are face to face. Hey, I'm a real person. I'm taking this very seriously, because all they're thinking on the other end is like, if I come to terms with this guy or the girl, am I actually going to be, are they going to be able to see this through? Um, and and so again, you do that by establishing as much rapport as possible, establishing as much understanding of the asset as possible with the selling team, showing your capability right off the cuff, have a lender ready, and even by the way, just because you have a lender ready doesn't mean you have to lock in that lender. I will always get 3 term sheets or more on any acquisition if I'm looking at it, or I'll recommend that to my clients, because every term sheet's different. And some banks will give you one term sheet and 6 months later, they'll give you a completely different one, even if the 10-year treasury stayed the same, right? In a perfect world. So what I'm trying to get at in that sense is you're when you have a lender locked in a preliminary term sheet, or it's a letter from your banker saying, hey, this person's capable of this acquisition, it's establishing that, hey, I don't even need there to be a question. I don't even want them to ask the question, do they have money? And so I think about I mean, it's just literally typical sales. It's crafting a story. What is the story that's being told? Hey, I'm a first-time investor, and yes, you might be comparing me to people who've done this 10 times over, but here's what I have. I have the drive and tenacity to see this through, because this is everything I'm focused on. This is not just one of 25 assets that I'm making offers on this month. This is the one I'm dialed in on. And that's your pitch if this is your first investment, because it's difficult to compete against anybody else in terms of credibility and certainty to close in any other realm, except this is all I'm focused on, right? So this is just like, if when I was a new broker, what I would say is, hey, I've got all the time in the world to work exclusively with you, as opposed to now it's like, hey, I've got 15 people just like you calling me every single day. Like, I really need to understand if we're the right fit to work with each other. So that's your pitch if you're a new investor. This is the one asset I'm going after, man, or woman. Like, I promise you, like, this is the one. Like, I'm going to spend all of my time and energy on this. Here's how I'm prepared. Here's where my money's coming from. Here's my vendors that are coming in. Here are my offer terms. Here's how I'm approaching it. Here's the only things that could happen that could cause me to walk away. Here's my timeline. Here's my game plan. And sometimes some of that's proprietary and you don't want to share all of it. But keep in mind, the more that you share, the better the rapport that you have, the more that they're going to build trust in your ability to close, and they'll be willing to move forward with you, and they might even take a chance.
That's great. That's great. I love that. Now, before we move on from kind of this topic, guys, do you have any questions to pepper Cecil with? We'll kind of go in topic blocks before we move on, and I'll just open the floor up to anybody that wants to ask Cecil, some of these questions, because this was great. I mean, just in general, over preparation in a lot of the areas that matter as a broker, as a seller, if you're trying to acquire something. A lot of those things don't require you to have experience. It just requires you to put in the time and the preparation to, kind of overcome that experience objection. Any questions?
I've got one, Matt.
Please, David.
Yeah, Cecil, appreciate all the great information. So, as a new commercial investor, I've got a couple residentials. Is there value to going with a smaller cash deal, getting something under my belt and putting it on, so to speak, my portfolio as I go to the next one? But that burns my capital, that delays me going to the next version, versus something in the 1.2 range where I need to get a lender. And then on that point, how do you go get that lender and term sheet in advance of deals?
Sure. So I think there's a couple of answers there. So I think the first and primary one is, I think your goals and what that investment and how that investment aligns with your goals and your strategy and your plan, I think is more important necessarily than the image that's being depicted by you having one under your belt. So I think, like, I don't think that you should just buy one just so you could tell people I now have a commercial investment. If, I hope that answers, I guess, the surface level part of the question. With that said, when you're talking with people to establish credibility, telling them, hey, I bought the retail center down the street. I saw this one. I had my eyes on it. I really like it. That is going to establish a lot of credibility. So I think it's a give and take. If and then you talked about in terms of source of capital. So again, there's a couple different things. If you're coming with all cash, it's always going to be stronger. Although people with lots of cash are always going to say they're coming in with all cash, and they're always going to put a loan on it. So a lot of times all cash is just like a strong term to use, like, hey, this is what I'm capable of. But a lot of people know that you're still going to get a loan. You're going to have a study period where you'd have the ability to get the loan if you want. It's kind of an all-encompassing, contingency period. So I think it's important to establish what you have at your disposal, but there's nothing wrong with getting a loan as long as you've shown that you are capable of going through that process. So when you talk about, working with lenders, I think it's important to have a lender relationship that's willing to say, hey, I've reviewed this person's assets and their personal financial statement, and they are capable of making an investment of this amount, or they have liquid funds in excess of this amount. It doesn't necessarily need to be a term sheet. I might have said term sheet earlier. What's important is that you have some type of letter establishing credibility of your ability to finance the fund or provide source of funds. That's what matters more than anything. So if you buy something with all cash, it's again, what matters here again is, let's go back to certainty to close. If you have all cash, you don't need to go through the same hoops that a lender would, so you can move a lot faster. So what the all cash advantage is, hey, listen, here's all I care about. I need clean title, and you might need a few things, and I don't want to necessarily carte blanche generalize the couple of things that anybody might need on an offer. But let's just say it's a straightforward retail center for tenants, right? Hey, I need clean title. I need a clean phase one. I need tenant estoppels. I need zoning certificate of compliance. I'll close 15 days after receiving those items. No other contingencies. That is a strong offer, right? Like that's how you go in and they're like, holy cow, no contingencies except for these items, these seller deliverables, you'll close within 15 days of getting that, right? And it's like, so that is how I would approach a cash offer more so than other things. But also, by the way, if you do something like that, you need to know what you're giving up. And so you need to make sure you're pricing in a greater margin of buffer. All right, let me speak to one more point there. So let's see. So what's more important, using cash to buy or using a lender if you're using up cash on another investment? If you have it, I'm trying to think here. Let's see if there's one other point. Again, owning commercial assets already establishes credibility because you can say, hey, this person already has this asset. But again, it's not the end all be all. Having a lender prepared is what's important to establish the credibility and source of funds, but you can always change that lender source later. It's just establishing the ability to get there. And then also, I think the other thing is general proximal knowledge. Depending on the area that you're investing in, the more that you can relay the knowledge that you have of an area, even if you don't already own an asset there, can still establish that credibility, even if you don't own that asset. I hope that answered that question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And obviously your excellent point on having a broker that knows the area and works with you and the communication. So appreciate it.
Yep. And David, if there's, brokers, nationwide brokers that you want to get, kind of a term sheet from of, hey, here's my financial, status and position, I'm looking at an asset in this range. Is this something that you guys, can lend on? Or if there's a specific market, then you can obviously go to local banks and kind of do that kind of legwork ahead of time. So that way you're at least teeing them up. Hey, I don't have an asset under contract yet, but I want to provide, any potential offer with, my LOI having this term sheet. Is that something that you guys can do for me ahead of time? Most of them will. They want the business. They're going to work with you on getting that kind of stuff. So I would suggest, if you know a specific market that you're going to be doing it in, find a local bank or start establishing some of those relationships. Or if there's a nationwide broker that you want to work with, those are options as well. So good questions there. Billy, you had a question?
Yeah, so I'm actually hoping to submit an LOI on a little strip center in Charleston today. However, this is a new market for me. And I've always been off market direct to seller guy. So I just started kind of my broker outreach, kind of network, like virtual networking and all this. And they brought me a deal. So I don't have, a lender in that new market yet and all of this, but it's a deal I want to offer on. But it's a little bit putting the cart before the horse, but I kind of want to get a rep in and it could be a good deal. However, this is the question I have for you. It's not the listing broker that that's bringing me the deal. It's another broker. So getting a lot of that upfront inside info or as much of it as I can from that listing broker has been tough because I'll go through my broker and say, hey, what do you know about this? And he's not super motivated to go pepper that listing broker for some of those nitty gritty details that I would like to try to kind of like you said, come with the most informed offer as I can. But there's just that little barrier, that extra broker there. What do you suggest, or what do you see is kind of best way to do it? Do you try to get it on a Zoom call with both brokers at the same time and just go direct while
Well,
keeping
I
your
guess
broker in a loop? Or
there's a couple different layers to that. My first indication is if you're asking your buyer broker to bring you information and they are not delivering, you're with the wrong buyer broker.
sure,
With that said, if you are not exclusive with that buyer broker and they've been sending you a lot and you've been asking a lot of questions and you're not acting on something, then they might lose steam because you're not exclusive with them and they might not be excited about answering a lot of the detailed questions. And that might not necessarily mean that they're the wrong buyer broker. It might just mean that they've lost steam working with you. Now, by the way, I have no idea what the details of the situation are, but I know the title of this is how to find the right brokers and how to work with the right brokers. So I'll add in a little thing here. Buyer brokerage is a grueling part of this business. I've
right,
done almost more than half of my business with it, and it is exhausting and it's extremely difficult to know where to prioritize your time. And I will have some clients that will ask me questions like, hey, and I'll send them something that's maybe not my direct primary market where I know the answers off the top of my head. I might have to do a little research. I might send them 3 assets in 2 weeks, and they might say, well, what's the market rent here, and what's this one here, and what do you think about this tenant mix, and what do you think about this street, and what do you think about
lots of
the future
questions. Yeah,
trajectory? And if I'm exclusive with that person, then I'm going to go do all of that research and give them every answer. If I'm not exclusive with them, then my question is going to be, has this person actually shown that they deliver? Have they actually made offers before that are strong? What type of offers are they making? Have they actually seen something through to the finish line? And if I'm getting red flags on that buyer, then I'm going to be less incentivized to give them all the information they want, and I might do the bare minimum. But if I am getting green flags from that buyer where they have followed through, they are making offers, they're telling me their investment criteria, they're actually following through, making offers on the stuff that meets it, then I'm going to get them that information. But so if you want to, and I want to add a couple another layer or two here. There's nothing wrong with making a quick offer if you don't have all the information you need, if timing is important. You might
timing
have
is
an
important.
opportunity and you have to say like, hey, you got to get an offer by Friday if you want to beat the 3 other groups that are still analyzing, or we have a call for offers deadline here, and by the way, there's how to handle call for offers is a totally other conversation, but because you don't always have to make the first round of a call for offers, but it depends on a case by case. But what I would do is I'd have an honest conversation with your broker and be like, hey, listen, like I'm prepared to make an offer. Here's kind of what I'm thinking, but I feel like I don't have as much information as I want. Talk to me, and just be straight up. Like, is there a reason that you can't get me this information? Maybe that information doesn't exist. Maybe you're
Yeah,
asking for, rent roll history or something like that. And it's a mom and pop that does everything by pen and pencil. Maybe there's a
yeah,
completely legitimate answer. Or maybe it's like, oh, dude, I'm so sorry. I've been swamped. I haven't had a chance to call them yet. And it's like, okay. Um, you know, and then you just have to ask yourself, trust your gut. Is that an honest answer? And I want to give them, some leeway, or is it, maybe I should reevaluate this relationship. So if you want to, and this is the balance between exclusive relationships with brokers and non-exclusive. If you have a non-exclusive relationship and you call every broker, you're going to see a ton of deals, but you're never going to be the first one to see the best one.
yeah,
If you want to be the first one to see the best one, you have to be exclusive. But you can't just choose any broker to be exclusive. You need to know that you're being exclusive with the person who's actually seeing the opportunities.
Yeah.
And when you're going into a new market, sometimes it's going to take a little time and a few swings and misses with different brokers to understand who the right person to work with is. But back to the original question, nothing wrong with making a quick offer if you have to because of the timeline. Just know that if you don't have all of that diligence and you haven't established that rapport and credibility, you're not going to be coming in with as strong of an offer.
Yeah.
And you
That's
just
where
have
we're
to
at.
balance, a few things, and again, there's lots of layers that we could dive into. I'd be happy to connect offline if you want another time, but I'll pause now unless Matt, you think I should dive into more. Hopefully that answered your question. Matt, you're muted.
I was going to say that's I think a perfect segue to kind of move into building strong alliances with brokers. And, if you are going to do that exclusive relationship, what are some of the criteria investors should be considering when partnering with a broker? And maybe from your side of the fence, what are some of the things you look for in working with investors and saying, hey, this is somebody that I want to give a first look at. This is somebody I want to build a relationship with long term. Like, how do you make yourself an outlier in a sea of people going, hey, Cecil, I'm looking for a great deal. What do you got for me, brother? Versus that, hey, this is somebody I really want to build a relationship with. We're going to play the long game here. How do you distinguish that, one, as a broker, and two, what do you suggest people look at in order to make sure that, if they are going to get an exclusive brokerage relationship with broker, what are some of the things that we as investors should want to make sure we double check to ensure that we're attaching our cart to the right broker horse?
Sure, absolutely. So to make sure that well, first and foremost, let me actually add in one extra layer here right before I dive into that. What you want to be doing is seeing every possible deal that's out there, and you want to get on every email list possible. And all you can do to get on every email list possible is go sign as many CAs as possible. And a lot of times you're not going to find this stuff on CoStar. I'm going to rattle off a couple of them here. Revere, RCM, Triple Net Pro, Crexy, and then obviously LoopNet and CoStar. And then here's one that a lot of times people don't do. Go to the brokerage company's website and look at their listings, because the amount of times that brokerage companies, and in fact, in specific, the larger broker companies will post something on their website that's not anywhere else, is incredible. So first and foremost, get on all of the lists so you can see all the deals. And the only way that you can get on the list again is by signing the CAs on these platforms, and then they'll have you in your database. And Newmark, Cushman, JLL, right? I mean, all these big dogs. But also make sure you're getting on the list of the places. If you're going after smaller assets, there's not going to be as many of these lists, by the way. And I should clarify, like in the sense where you're going to be getting all of these blasts. And in that, then what you want to do is you want to go on these platforms and set up criteria for yourself, so that you're getting the emails from the platform when they want you to look at an asset. So the first thing is making sure you're seeing this stuff that's out there. And what you'll be able to interpret not only is seeing the deals are out there, but you'll see the brokers that are most presenting this stuff to the market. And if you're looking in a very specific market, and after 6 months, you've seen there's 3 or 4 brokers that have put out almost every single listing, well, then those are people that you probably want to be talking to. However, they're also probably not your buyer broker, ironically. But those are the people that you want to be talking to at least start to establish and understand the market. And then, like, what you can do is you can actually go and if you're, and it depends on how much work you want to put into this to find the right buyer broker. But if you go into these systems and you can see transactions that have finally closed, look and see who the buyer broker was. Buyer brokers, and 9 times out of 10 are going to tell these softwares, hey, I represented the buyer. I represented the buyer. So CoStar is in fact a phenomenal resource for actually going to see who the top brokers are in specific regions and go look at their stats. And if you have a CoStar subscription, you can literally type in somebody's name. You guys can go type in my name right now and be like, is he so full of shit? Is he just showing us a complete page of lies, or has he actually done some deals, right? And so you can actually see what they've done on CoStar. Now, leases, most of that's proprietary. A lot of lease stuff is not on there. Only sale transactions typically is on there, just because so much of lease stuff is proprietary. So keep that in mind. Now, jumping back, finding the right broker typically is just experience, but it's also knowing that you're going after a broker that's seeing a lot of opportunities in a certain sector. And that could be a geographical footprint, or it could be an asset class sector. And so if you're going to go exclusive with somebody, you want to make sure that that person is seeing the opportunities that are in a certain region. But a broker putting opportunities in front of you is only the first step. The next thing you want to look for in this broker is, do they have the wherewithal and the knowledge and the experience to be able to take you through the transaction with the least margin of error possible, with the least amount of potential obstacles that are in your control? And then third, what role do you want that broker to play? I actually have some clients that I'll work with, or they're like, listen, I run the whole transaction myself. I just need you to put opportunities in front of me, and we have, one commission agreement, right? But I have other clients who are like, listen, I don't have the bandwidth to manage all of these transactions. I trust you completely, Cecil, to make decisions just as I would. I'm going to tell you where I want to offer, what assets I want to offer on, but everything else, I trust you to take through the process. I have a different commission agreement with them. Obviously, those amounts are different because I'm taking on a lot more responsibility in those roles. So what you want to ask yourself when you establish a relationship with this person is, what are the specific roles and responsibilities that I'm expecting of you? And this is just like any work and relationship. Like, what are you giving me in exchange for what I'm giving you? And by the way, there's no right or wrong answer. It's just going in eyes wide open. And then the other thing that I'll add on, just in terms of finding the right person, is like, sometimes you can test the waters a little bit, but you don't want to test too long. But it's saying, hey, I'm new to this area. I'm calling a couple of brokers, and I just want to, see who might be the right fit for me to work with. Here's my criteria. Have a clear set of defined criteria, and then present it to them, and present it to a few people, and then see who sends you opportunities, and then see who falls off after a while, and see who doesn't. Now, if you're not acting on any of these and they meet your criteria, almost everybody's going to fall off if you're not exclusive, by the way. You need to actually act on what you say you want to act on for people to take you seriously. And then the last thing I'll add in is, always just make sure there's some type of termination clause in there. You're going to need to give these people some period of time to work their asses off for you before you could terminate them, because it does take time to find the right deal. But make sure you have an out clause. If you realize the relationship isn't the best fit. Most of them are going to make you lock in a specific commission amount, but the good ones will say, hey, if there's a deal where it's, like a point off or something like that, and we're doing a bunch of deals together, like, I'll work with you. I'll take a point off here. We'll add a point here, and it's, or like, for example, I actually have an agreement with somebody, and we just put something under. There actually is a cooperating brokerage commission, which typically there isn't above 5 million. Under 5 million, most often there is. And so you won't have to come out of pocket if there's a cooperating brokerage commission. But I have a specific commission amount with this person, and the cooperating was a point less. And I said, hey, no worries. I put in writing, I'll just take the co-op. I don't necessarily need this. Sometimes people put that in writing. If there's a co-op, you'll just take the co-op, nothing else. So that's a little something you can add. Flip it over. As a broker, do you want me to go into the broker perspective of who's the right people to work with? Okay.
Yeah, sure. Then we'll move on.
So as a broker, I'm going to ask you very specific questions about your investment criteria. Are you a cash flow buyer? Are you an equity buyer? Are you a value add buyer? And I'll say, are you opportunistic, value add, core, or core plus? Based on that criteria, then what is your, what is your occupancy requirement? What is your, cash on cash return requirement? Are you focused on cash in year 1 or years 1 through 3? Are you focused on a 10-year average cash on cash? What is your exit strategy? What is your IRR metric, and how do you assess IRR? And then sometimes IRR can get too complicated from an initial investment criteria question, because there's so many assumptions that go into an exit IRR. But these are the questions that I'm asking people. And to be completely transparent, if you're giving me an answer that 99% of other investors would give me, then I'll send a few opportunities your way, and if you act on them, then I'll work with you. But if you're telling me, hey, Cecil, I want to buy, retail neighborhood centers in a really strong, like, and I'll say Maryland. Hey, I want to buy a retail center in Howard County, 20,000 square feet, and I want to buy it at an 8.5 to 9% cap rate, more than 80% leased. I'm like, hey, dude, I'm sorry, but everybody and their mother wants that. And I'm going to work with 16 other people that have already established their ability to get to the finish line before I work with you on that. Now I'll put it in front of you maybe, but like that's a harsh truth sometimes. Versus if somebody says, hey, I'm raising this capital. My focus is, 7.5 to 8% cap rates, in an interest rate environment where I'm getting debt at 6.25 to 7%, give or take right now. Then I'm looking at that person and say, okay, so now we're talking business because I do have opportunities for you, and we're going to be able to compete if we're in that realm. But if you're telling me criteria that everybody that has money would do, then it's really hard for me to invest a lot of time and energy with you unless there's some other variables involved, some other type of relationship. And then I think the only other thing that I would add on is if you give your criteria to somebody, and I think I already mentioned this, but if you give your criteria to somebody and they send you opportunities, you got to act on it. And if you don't, no matter who you are, people will fall off. Brokers will fall off from you.
Good advice there. Maybe we can shift over a little bit more to, well, what would you guys prefer we shift over to? Would you like to talk more about finding acquisitions and lead generation, or would you like to focus more on leasing and negotiating? What would be of value to you guys? And maybe Cecil, if you want to throw any other topics that you and I had on the list.
Yeah, I can talk about lessons learned from due diligence. I can talk about lessons learned from, third-party vendors, attorneys, and title. I can talk about book versus reality once you own something, landlord-tenant relationships. I can talk about underwriting assumptions. I can talk about how to find value potentially in some areas where others might miss it if they're not spending as much time on front-end diligence.
What do you guys think? You can either
Finding value sounds cool.
Say that last part again.
That last one that Cecil mentioned, the finding value where others miss it. That sounds interesting.
Yeah, I thought so too.
second that. I like that.
Cool. Full disclosure, it takes work. And the hard part here, guys, is, the amount of time that you're going to spend on deals that you don't actually move forward is going to drive you insane, but you have to be prepared to put in that time if you want to find that value. Quick example where I typically find the most value. And by the way, there's so many areas. It really, again, comes down to what is your strength, right? I have an accounting background, so numbers is my strength. So I'm going to give an example of where I find value in numbers, but maybe your strength is people. And maybe you see a center and you see management, and you see the tenants really don't like management. And you're like, well, I can come in here and I can establish a great relationship with these tenants and I can completely transform the feel, right? Or maybe your strength is speed and efficiency, right? I'm doing a deal with a landlord right now. Well, one of the guys on my team is, I'm helping kind of oversee, it's a 10,000 square foot physical therapy lease and the landlord has taken 3 weeks minimum per response, right? So maybe you can go in and say, I know I can be super efficient. So again, there's a lot of examples of where you can find value. I'm going to specifically focus on one of the ones where I find it most often, and that's in the financials. When, especially on under 5 million and even more so on under 2.5 million, when you look at their profit and loss, you should be getting a minimum of 3 years. I do love more, but also if you go further back, you need to understand that those financials aren't going to be as relevant for future projections. They're just going to tell a story and help you have historical context. But 3 years of financials, I would love to see a balance sheet. If anybody with accounting background, capital expenditures are typically reflected on a balance sheet, at least in your interim financials before you report to to the IRS. So I want to know what capital expenditures have incurred and what leasing commissions and what legal fees related to deals, what lease-up costs were there. That's typically, well, and here's the ironic part. A lot of times mom and pops will put one-time expenses on their operating P&L. And a lot of times the sophisticated people with accounting backgrounds, it doesn't mean they're sophisticated investors. Accounting background people will keep those one-time capital expenditures on a balance sheet. And so it's literally two sides of the scale in a sense. On one side, if you're looking at a P&L and just going straight to the bottom line, you could be missing a whole bunch of add backs to NOI. And I'm not a proponent of just saying, let me find every single dollar I can add back to make this look way better of an investment. It's more so, you spent $40,000 on Windows in 2023, but $3,000 on Windows in 22 and $2,000 on Windows in 21. And I know inflation really drove costs up, but that's a big jump. That looks like a one-time expense. Let me ask the seller to confirm. Oh, boom, my NOI just jumped by 20 grand because they replaced half the windows in the building, and I'm not going to have to do that for an extended period of time. That's kind of what I'm talking about again, on a surface level of looking at a P&L. Are there leasing commissions and legal costs in there? Are there distributions? What are the management fees? I can go a couple other layers, Maddie, but do you want me to pause there?
Yeah, no, let's, because this is good, right? I mean, what you're talking about is the name of the game, as we all know, is if you can boost NOI, that doesn't mean you have to boost NOI by dumping $1 million into the building, right? You could boost NOI by just finding some of these accounting inefficiencies, operational inefficiencies. I love that you brought that up, because a lot of people will put stuff on the balance sheet that maybe shouldn't be on the balance sheet and should actually have a lower NOI, so the value should be less, or they're carrying it on their monthly operating P&L, which really should be on the balance sheet, and therefore the NOI should be higher, hence the value is there. So that's a great example. Let's dig into a few others.
Sure. And so, next step here is, and this is where you find the most, but this is also book versus reality conversation. If you guys are looking at retail, I think a couple of people mentioned retail. I know that is a hot topic. It's one of the hottest asset classes, by the way, for us here in Maryland right now. Industrial is really cooling off. Multifamily is just struggling to bridge the gap. But if you're looking at retail, obviously you're looking at a lot of triple net lease scenario situations. Have you reviewed the CAM reconciliations for the last 3 years? And have you cross-referenced those with the actual operating statements? And have you done an informal audit of your own? And to be clear here, I'm not suggesting that you're doing an intense forensic accounting on this stuff before you're making offers, because it can take a considerable amount of time to find these answers. But you want to at least have a surface level understanding. Quickly, let me grab the CAM reconciliations and the operating P&Ls for the last 3 years, and let me just compare OpEx with what was reimbursed and what's supposed to be reimbursed. And then, so on that layer, I want to make sure everything's being reconciled and accounted for properly. On a second layer, depending on how complex the management is, how large the center is, how complex the tenants are, how sophisticated they are, you could have a lot of different details. And I don't want to go too down this rabbit hole, but restructuring the way leases are written, if it's possible, can also add value. And what I mean by that is, do I have a retail tenant with a cap on CAM? Do I have another tenant with a cap on controllable expenses, but not non-controllable? Do I have a retail tenant with a fixed CAM amount that's similar to the others, but it's not a true pass-through? Do I just have different types of agreements with different tenants in the same building, which creates an inefficiency because you're spending a lot more time because you're trying to figure out who does what? Am I passing through everything that could be? And here's a simple one: utilities. Is everything sub-metered? By the way, it doesn't necessarily have to be. And that's the beautiful thing about this business, is nothing has to be a certain way. And there's nothing wrong with something being wrong. It's more so going in eyes wide open and not having surprises. I can go, into a few other things, but let me pause right there. I saw somebody in the chat, and Maddie, I don't know if you want to adjust the direction or something.
Yep. Nope. Let's see. Cecil, I'm a broker, investor, and like you, greatest skills people is cold calling. Let's see. What system would you develop, and where can I, let me see. Michael, do you want to unmute yourself and ask this question real fast? There's a lot in there. And
I think, well, and Michael, you can feel free to chime in. I do think I can adjust a little bit here. So it seems like you're getting in touch with, oh, sorry, Michael, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, so I just wanted to, maybe if you were in my situation, you could provide some just like super great way of how you would attack it that maybe I'm just not aware of. But my situation is very identical to yours, but I'm really good at basically cold calling and finding off-market deals. And my greatest skill is probably just interacting with people. But the challenges that I've kind of faced is like, they're real receptive to give me lease work. And then, but when so most of the time they'll tell me they will sell it, right? And I'll get the rent rolls. I'll extract the value based on the numbers and what somebody's willing to pay for it ultimately. But what would you do, like, if you were in my situation, to like just get the most deals, as far as the sale transaction, and then look at it as like trying to buy it to present to this group or the partners here? Like what would you do to like just get get the most information with just a big database that I'm calling on? And then like would you approach it any differently than this? What I do is I ask them if they'll sell it, and then everything else kind of flows from there. Like, do you think that's the best, absolute best approach, or would you do something different?
Well, first and foremost, I wish there was a silver bullet. Right.
Yeah.
I have several ideas and things that I want to, touch on based on your question. But I do just want to make real clear, like, that sometimes you could do all the right things and it just doesn't pan out. Like, and this business, timing is everything.
Mm,
And I mean, I have a great example actually of a small center. Actually, one of the ones on the sheet that I showed you is 10,000 square feet. We sold it for like $2.3 million. And I contacted this guy and I essentially I called them for about 2 years. And we probably spoke on the phone 4 times over the 2 years before he allowed me to sell it. And I probably called him about 50 to 60 times. And the
that's,
longest stretch of time where he ghosted me was probably 4 months. And
mm,
I was calling him probably 10 to 12 times in those 4 months. And
mm,
what would happen is every time I would get disheartened and be like, all right, this is the last time I'm going to call him. If he doesn't answer, he would answer and give me a little bit of hope, right? Which is the worst thing ever. Um,
keep it
but
going.
at the end of the day, off market deals are incredible because oftentimes you can get them potentially at a better price because there's not as much competition. But you also need to know that if you're going after off market deals, it's way easier for a seller to change their mind, and it happens all the time. Once
Mm,
somebody commits to going on market, you know that they're going to see it through, if they come within range of the pricing guidance. But off
mm,
market, people change their minds all the time, and that's just the nature of the beast. Now, I want to jump in a couple of things here. So first and foremost, leasing is the best way to get a relationship with a building owner, but don't take leasing yourself if it's going to take you away from your focus. The
mm.
best option is to have somebody else on your team that you can say, this guy on my team will handle the leasing, but you need to make sure that that level of service is going to be there.
I
But that
figured,
is the best way
yeah,
to get in the door, by the
I'm glad
way.
I'm glad you said that, because that is kind of what it has developed. Like just the other day, hopefully get this new listing, and then I have support on that side, and they're highly proficient at it. So that came, I did notice that. But what
That's
else?
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, and I'll add a quick note too to the last comment or the last kind of subject I was on is your strength could be leasing. You could see a center that's been vacant for 2.5 years, and you're talking to a person, why is there been so much vacancy? And it might be, oh, the landlord takes 3 weeks to respond, or oh, the landlord is my way or the highway, or whatever the reason may be. That could be your value add. You're going to go in there and lease it yourself and hustle this thing until it's fully leased, right? Beth Azor,
Mm,
if you guys don't know her, you should look her up, read her book. She is phenomenal for retail.
Who is that?
But Beth Azor.
Okay.
And by the way, if you guys don't already know Bob Knackle and Strip Mall Guy on LinkedIn, these guys are very loud voices
Strip mall
online,
guy's
but they're
awesome on Twitter.
yeah,
He's
no,
the
but they're
greatest.
they're
He's so good.
like they're great voices. They're super active on social media. Um, anyway, but Beth Azor is like the retail canvassing queen, figuring out how to turn opportunity in retail that like wasn't there, and she's got so much great content out there. She even wrote a book, Beth Azor. But I want to jump back in too. So again, getting the leasing work for a landlord, if you're a broker, is the best way to get your foot in the door. But then when you want to find something to sell, you need to figure out your like who you are and stay within your personality type. The way I would approach potentially bringing an offer to a seller might be different than the way that my partner would approach it, or it might be different than the way you approach it. And again, there's no silver bullet.
mm,
With the caveat that I would say is um, the question, would you sell, is is my least favorite question.
mm,
Everybody would sell. It's just a matter of when and for what price. And even if it's somebody who's like, we are a long-term holder, this is a generational asset. There are people who say that and they do pass it down. But most of the time, it's just the right time and the right place. This business is all about timing. And so it's knowing how to stay in touch with people. Follow up is key. And then it's also approaching the conversation. The way that I personally like to approach these conversations is I say, listen, I have a client who's been looking at assets just like yours. They made an offer here at this price point based on this occupancy, based on this age of building, based on this area. I think they would make a very strong offer here. If you give me, a trailing 12 and a rent roll just to start, I'll sign a CA. My client can give you feedback within 5 business days. And if it makes sense, we could dive into more diligence. And then I'll be able to have some expertise on that market to provide. So like
that was pretty powerful. Can you repeat that? If I have another client who made strong offers just like yours, because that makes it real. A trailing 12, is that a rent roll or just the last 12 months?
Just the last one. And by the way, it doesn't have to be trailing 12. I just came up with an arbitrary quick 2 things. I need to know what the profit and loss is, and I need to know what the tenancy is. And I need to know what the weighted average lease term is. I need to know if every lease is rolling over the next 12 months or if I've got 7 years of security, so to speak.
And then the CA, is that like an NDA or what is it?
Yeah. Confidentiality agreement, non-disclosure,
okay.
And we'll send out the replay of this so that way, because 1, Cecil talks fast, and 2, he says a lot of good stuff. So we'll make sure that you guys get a recap of this. For the sake of time, I want to kind of keep us moving to as many topics as we can touch. What other questions do you guys have for Cecil? Travis, go ahead, Travis.
Someone said this earlier, Cecil, you said if you wanted to invest locally to get involved politically, I'd have a local portfolio of like 6 deals. And what did you mean by that?
Well, and to clarify, politics is where everybody who wants to have influence is. So it's not necessarily being a politician is a good way to invest locally. It's you're going to be in conversations, in circles, in areas, in places, so perfect example. I was just volunteering. This is, years ago before I joined Hyatt, I was volunteering in this campaign. I said, here's what I want to do. Here's what I want to be. And all these people said, you got to talk to this person. I went and talked to, this company and got in, and I was able to get in that room, deeper relationships, because the people that were at these political events were involved. And a lot of times people who own real estate are involved politically, especially at the local level, because what happens at the local level in terms of municipal code is really crucial to how, what their investment experience is. Perfect example. I just actually was appointed to the Historic Preservation Commission in the city of Annapolis here. And to be honest with you, I didn't even realize quite how important of a role it was. I just thought it was more of an administrative thing. And I went to this networking event last week, and I hadn't even been sworn in. I hadn't notified anybody of this. I had 7 separate building owners that I am either working with or want to work with come up to me saying, congratulations for getting on HPC. That's an incredible position. Hey, I've got this building and this thing is going to come before you next month. Can we talk about it? And I'm like, oh my God. So, and again, not everybody needs to join, commissions or anything like that. But the point is if you're investing in a hyperlocal region, what happens at the municipal level is very much impactful. And so if you are in circles or in conversations, going to city council, you're going to see who's bringing stuff to planning commission. You're going to see what's happening there. You might see, and somebody had a comment about falling out due to permitting, and I could talk about having the right third-party service providers, but you could go see how planning commission responds to this guy's development. This guy, here's a great example. Out-of-town investor just purchased 3 historic properties in Annapolis 4 years ago. They actually called me when they were under contract, and I told them who they needed to talk to and when. Unfortunately, they did not take me up on my advice. And 4 years later, they did not get the approvals they wanted, and they are now selling, and they will be taking a substantial bath. And by the way, if they had taken my advice, it doesn't mean that they wouldn't have taken a bath. Annapolis is a very hard place in the historic district to get things done. So I don't want to say that my advice would have saved them, but they would have gone in eyes wide open instead of getting surprised. And that's the key to real estate, going in eyes wide open. So getting involved locally, what I might say is are there, local political events where people that might be financing campaigns are going to be, where you can build those relationships? Or maybe it's going to city council meetings or county council meetings and seeing what's happening in the economic landscape. Or maybe it's getting involved in a commission that is seeing some of this development through. Or maybe it's just staying in tune with what's happening in the community. Maybe there's sessions that are happening with the community, public meetings, see who's doing what. And again, I don't want to go too much into the weeds here, but there's not one correct answer for how to be involved. The answer is just how can you be around the people that own real estate in the community?
Love that. Sammy, you had a question, brother?
Hear me? Can you hear me? Yes. Yeah, I do. My favorite commercial type that I'm looking for is also neighborhood retail center. But I'm not just focused on that. But I've been looking at medical office buildings as well. So I don't know if you have had any experiences with the condo for sale in a medical office building. Is that something that you've come across as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Condo investing is also just a very different, well, I say very different. It's a category of its own. So there are times where I love condos, and there are times where I loathe condos. I think the key here is knowing, well, I mean, and some preliminary questions. If we have more time, what I would dive into is how many owners are there in the building? Who has the largest voting stock? Where are their condos in the building? Where are they located? What's the history of the condo association? Do they have a good relationship with the owners? Do they have a bad relationship? What are upcoming special assessments? What is the, I mean, again, there's a lot of different detailed questions that you might go into, looking at the recent board meetings minutes, making sure you're requesting not only a resale letter from the condo association, but requesting at least the last year of minutes from board meetings, maybe more than 1 year, again, depending on the building. But also, like, here's a situation. Maybe you have a perfect medical office condo in a large building, but then you find out there's one guy that owns 80% of the condos in that building. Well, guess what? If you have a difference of opinion with that owner, guess who's winning? Not you. And you have no idea what impact they have. And by the way, the condo association passes a budget on what common area maintenance is done in a building. And if you have somebody that has the majority of the voting shares, they can completely influence the common area maintenance. And if you own a condo in a building where you think there should be improvements, but somebody else who owns the majority of the voting shares does not, you're never going to get those improvements. And everything that you thought you could do to add value to make everything feel better about that condo, guess what? It ain't happening. So I think there's a lot of layers in there, but it doesn't mean that I stay away from condos. It's just a different investment.
Yeah, after speaking to the broker of this listing, I mean, everything seems perfect. It's a dental office, 3,100 square feet in
Love
good area,
dentists.
Austin, and recently a hedge fund purchased the whole business. So it's KKR based, so it's a big hedge fund, and it got a long-term lease, and the whole medical office building is all doctors and dentists and chiropractors and stuff. So it's been there since last 15 years. But while doing the due diligence, I mean, all the paperwork, everything is a triple net lease. Everything is covered, all the expenses. It's a 7.75 cap. I'm trying to negotiate it to about 8 cap. I mean, there's like everything is paid by the dental office. It's triple net. I have zero participation or anything in this one. It's going to be super passive. I mean, what else should I be looking at? I mean, I've looked at the building, the roof, and stuff like that. As you know, the medical office building has a HOA type thing, right? Where even that is also paid for the dental office tenant.
So this goes into book versus reality.
Right.
If it's a large private equity firm that purchased it, you're probably not going to have any problem with them paying bills.
Yeah.
But you have to understand, just because somebody is responsible for covering the cost of something doesn't mean they can. And this will go into more of the mom and pop centers. We're under contract on a 23,000 square foot retail center right now in Frederick, Maryland. And the tenants are fully responsible for everything, including replacement of the HVAC units. And there's a couple that are going to need to be replaced in the next couple of years and some in the next 10. So he's writing it into his pro forma that all will need to be replaced. And we're talking about, well, you have the right to pass through that entire expense, but at 15K a unit, mom and pop business in 2,000 square feet, that's not even doing $1 million a year, top line, and probably less than 200,000 bottom line. Do they have 15K to just shell out on a new unit? And what's the reality of the situation? And a lot of times people say, okay, well, I want to be a great landlord because I don't want to lose this tenant. The opportunity cost, if I lost this tenant, had to pay for the replacement unit and then had 12 months of vacancy or 6 months of vacancy. What is that true cost versus me just covering the cost of the HVAC myself and having them in it? So again, your situation, if a private equity bought in, probably is not much of a concern, but that is an overall good example. The second thing, though, is just understanding the condition of the building overall, your common areas, your parking.
It's good.
Here's an example of a medical office condo in Annapolis leases a parking lot from a developer across the street. That lease has 4 years remaining. And guess what? He has plans to develop that lot. And when that parking lot goes goodbye, that medical office condo no longer meets the parking threshold requirements for local zoning code. And you will be grandfathered in. But if that space, if that dentist moves out and it becomes vacant for more than 12 months, you're done. No more medical, right? I'm not saying that's a situation here, but these are little, like just little variables that you want to think about. So understand the municipal code for parking ratios is a big thing. Understanding how much parking is owned versus leased, which, by the way, this is a very unique situation, not something that's going to be, seen in a lot of circumstances, but it's just one of those lessons that was learned. And again, percentage of people that own condos in that building, who has the most voting shares? Will you actually be able to have a voice that's heard, or are you just a voice that nobody cares about because you have no influence over what decisions are made? And how old is that building? Even if the roof and there's no upcoming special assessments, well, what if that hallway is 15 years old and you really want to replace the floors and repaint? Or what if, you know what I mean? Like, and you can't do that. What if you want to add some landscaping to spruce it up and they don't want to do it? Like, those are the things that you think about, because not everybody in that condo building passes through those expenses to everybody. So not everybody has the same mentality that you might in terms of the CAM being passed through. And then the final thing, always consider a worst case scenario, even though dentists rarely move because it costs so much for them to, and even though a private equity firm bought them, so it seems like it's pretty safe in terms of that investment. What happens if they leave, and how much tenant improvement allowance you're going to have to put in to turn over that space to somebody else? And is it going to be a small business that slides in there that's going to need you to finance it all for them, even if you can amortize it on top of rent? Or are they going to be, or is this a market where business owners have plenty of money to pay for the improvements themselves? So just think about that and just make sure you're prepared for worst case scenario, which in my circumstance would be lack of voting and a huge capex that might come if they move out.
Good stuff.
Thank you.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
Yes.
All right. So as we're kind of getting down to the last few minutes here, Cecil, I know you're always consistently learning, consuming, networking, and, trying to add more kind of tools and skills to your tool belt. What are the books, the communities, the podcasts, news outlets? Like, how are you continuously keeping your, finger on the pulse of the market and just continuing to, make you as an investor, as a broker, more valuable, more sharp?
Sure, absolutely. And by the way, I saw the link with Beth Azor. She might be a coach as well now, but she has tons of books and free content out there. You do not need to pay Beth Azor for anything to get a ton of her valuable content. I just want to make that note. In terms of things, so I think for everybody, the answer is different. If you guys are already a part of this with Maddie, like obviously you're doing the right things, you're in the right places. I think for me, it's like I like to learn macroeconomic information to understand what's happening at the macroeconomic level, and then I like to learn about hyper local. But I am focused really predominantly hyper local in the suburban corridor of Maryland, 2 million MSA. And so I'm focused, and I stay at the metropolitan city centers specifically because it's just a different type of investing in our area. And that's just because I want to be niche. So for you want to think about, where am I looking to invest? Am I just investing wherever I can find the right opportunity as long as everything makes sense? Or am I investing in a specific area? And if you're focused on one specific area, a lot of the things that I would look to learn is news about that area. So local newsletters and things of the sort. If I'm investing all over, I might be looking at like more of a national kind of newsletter of just overall markets. I think a great kind of newsletter that I've jumped onto recently that kind of touches a lot of national markets, but is more focused actually in Texas and California and New York is CRE Daily. It's a good, daily newsletter. It comes out. I'm trying to think. I mean, Massimo Group puts out a lot of free content out there, but they also just want to charge you for coaching. They're a good group. They have a bunch of events and stuff, and that's probably, in my experience, the largest kind of firm out there. But again, there's so much free content out there, and I think it's more focused on like learning like more about where you are in terms of like podcasts, I mean, there's also a lot out there. I'm a bad podcast listener, if I can be totally transparent.
Yeah, that's fine.
But obviously, like, Bigger Pockets and the guys that popped off of Bigger Pockets always have great content. I mean, David Green, Jay Scott, yeah, Maddie, you've had content out there, and then I'm trying to think. There's who's the redhead guy that invested in self storage? I think he has one too.
Oh,
I
AJ
know
Osborne.
that. Yeah, I think Matt Fairclough has one. Joe Fairless. So there's so much great content out there. But again, I predominantly am looking at macroeconomic information. What's happening at the federal level from an interest rate, from an overall economy standpoint, what's might be happening in just different markets at a high level in terms of overall asset class sentiment. But then really I'm focused hyper local information.
Cool. Now, what's your outlook over, now that the Fed has started their rate cut cycle? What's your outlook on where you think the opportunities and or challenges might be over the next 12 to 24 months?
My favorite answer is the best time to buy real estate is yesterday. And if you're going in eyes wide open and it meets your criteria, it doesn't matter what the situation is. And frankly, I love like clients who are open to, and like me personally, like right now, I'm not actively looking for myself. I'm representing a lot of clients, but I would love to buy something in a higher interest rate environment where it still pencils for me, because if the interest rates ever go down, then it's going to be great. Like, do not ever have an exit better than your entry. You'd always like, and sometimes I would even recommend maybe increasing the exit cap over your entry cap just in case. But so to answer your question, how do I feel about the current state of the market? Inventory is just tough right now. It was picking up in the spring and summer a little bit, which is weird. Summer is usually slow, and then this fall locally for me, it's been really limited in the last couple of months, except for larger assets where it's just institution is just turning. I think my favorite asset class again is neighborhood retail, but I do think the best opportunity right now is in office because everybody's afraid of it. But that doesn't just mean go buy an office building at all. And I'm not saying that. I'm saying just buy smart. And the best gut feel is like drive to the asset you're looking at and say, would I have my office here? Like, and that's pretty much it. And again, the neighborhood stuff is centered around that as well. In terms of overall outlook, I mean, all indicators are that interest rates will continue to decline. But I do think that it's important to note that the more that they decline, the more cash is going to come out of waiting. And so you just need to think about, again, what arena am I playing in? Am I playing in an arena that I can compete in? And as things get more competitive, am I just going to be squeezed out, or am I actually going to be able to go to play? And then medical office is always great. It's just in our market, it is extremely competitive. Now for condos, that's in a condo 3,000 square feet. That's obviously something where you can win that stuff all day because you don't have the big groups going after that. I would say hospitality is interesting because I do think that there is a lot of hospitality that is struggling, and I think there could be opportunity, but it's difficult to finance hospitality right now. And I think that it's very geographically based. I think industrial, well, in Maryland, it's an interesting situation where industrial is cooled off, but it's such a dense area that, knowing the hyperlocal region, there's always going to be intense demand for industrial, even though it's cooled off. I don't know. I mean, I can talk about each asset class. Multifamily, everybody thought that, I personally thought the bloodbath would be this year, and it hasn't happened. I don't know how people are still surviving. I mean, I was sending deals out for people that were class B and C assets that couldn't get rescue capital, that were losing $1 to $2 million a year, and they still haven't sold. I mean, I just don't know how these people can hang on. I mean, there has to be a breaking point somehow, some way soon. In metropolitan centers, we're seeing a lot of building owners giving keys back to banks now, more so than ever. But in suburban areas, especially with regional lenders, like they're just negotiating and extending.
Yeah.
So I just don't know when all of the opportunity will come. But if you're waiting for the right time, you're going to be too late. You have to be able to take action now on stuff that works. And then the more you take action on singles and doubles, the more you're going to see home runs put in front of you that you weren't expecting.
Love it. Cecil, this was great, man. Thank you so much for your time today. And I'm sure people may want to follow up with you. They may want to do a deal with you. They may want, to have you represent them. You know, what is the best place for people to connect with you, follow you, you know, get in touch with you? And obviously we'll make sure that we circulate that out to the group in the recap email.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously contact info is readily accessible if you look me up on CoStar if you have anything, but my website, if you have the subscription, but my website is just my name, cecilcummins.com. Pretty straightforward. You'll be able to contact me through there. You don't actually have to contact me through the website. I can give you my email address and my cell phone number. You know, I'm an open book. I'm happy to chat anytime. Obviously, my availability is, you know, peaks and wanes, right? There's some days where I've got a full day open. There's some days where I'm not even able to return your call for 24 hours. But I can promise you that I will get back to you within 24 hours anytime you reach out. And more than happy to chat anytime.
Love it. Thanks so much, brother. Thank you, everybody, for being on the call today. We will see you guys on next week's call, and keep an eye out for the recap email if you want to revisit any of the comments and value that Cecil shared today. Thanks for joining us.